My name is Sarah Whitman. At midnight on my 19th birthday, my stepfather broke into my bedroom and beat me until my shoulder dislocated. Through tears, I looked up to see my mother standing in the doorway watching as I begged for help. But the real betrayal came 3 years later when I found the locked box of intercepted police reports hidden in her closet. If you've ever discovered that the person you trusted most was working against you, let me know where you're watching from. Hit subscribe to join others who understand that family betrayal leaves scars deeper than any physical wound. For the first 7 years of my life, it was my mom and me in our small Atlanta apartment. We didn't have much, but we had each other. Mom worked double shifts as a nurse at Piedmont Hospital, leaving me with our elderly neighbor, Mrs. Grimes, more often than not. But when she came home, exhausted with dark circles under her eyes, she'd still find the energy to read me bedtime stories or help with my homework. "You and I against the world, Sarah Bear," she'd whispered, using the nickname that made me feel safe and loved. Everything changed when she met Richard. I was 8 years old when Richard Whitman entered our lives. He seemed perfect at first, a successful real estate developer, charming smile, and he brought flowers every time he visited. He made my mother laugh in ways I had never heard before. Her face glowed when he was around, like someone had finally turned on a light inside her. "He could be good for us," she told me, brushing my hair one night after our first dinner with him. "Don't you think so?" I nodded because I wanted her to be happy. His cologne smelled expensive, and he bought me a beautiful set of colored pencils after learning I liked to draw. Having a dad like other kids wouldn't be so bad. They married 6 months later in a small courthouse ceremony. I was the flower girl in a pale yellow dress, holding a tiny bouquet of daisies. Richard moved into our apartment, bringing designer furniture and framed artwork that made our home feel like someone else's. 3 months after that, we relocated to his sprawling Tudor-style house in Buckhead, one of Atlanta's wealthiest neighborhoods. "We're moving up in the world," Mom said, squeezing my hand as we drove through the ornate iron gates for the first time. But even at 9 years old, I sensed something wasn't right about Richard. The way his smile disappeared when my mother left the room. How his eyes followed me with calculation rather than affection. The tight grip on my shoulder when introducing me to neighbors. "This is my stepdaughter, Sarah. We're still getting to know each other." The first incident happened when I was 11. I'd spilled orange juice on his imported silk rug while reaching for the TV remote. His face transformed, jaw clenched, eyes narrowed to slits. He grabbed my wrist so hard I felt the bones grind together. "Do you have any idea how much that rug costs?" he hissed, twisting until I whimpered. "Richard, it was an accident," my mother said from the doorway, her voice high. "Sarah, go get some club soda from the kitchen." Later that night, I heard them arguing behind their bedroom door. "She's a child," my mother insisted. "She needs discipline," Richard replied. "You've been too soft on her." I rubbed my bruised wrist under the covers and tried to convince myself this was normal, that all stepdads were strict, that my mother would protect me if things ever got bad. I was wrong on both counts. As I entered my teenage years, Richard's discipline escalated from grabbing wrists to slaps that left no marks to punches placed where clothing would cover the bruises. My mother's responses shifted too, from mild intervention to nervous silence to turning away when it happened. At school, I was the quiet girl who wore long sleeves even in Georgia's humid heat. The one who flinched when teachers raised their hands too, or when lockers slammed nearby. I made few friends, afraid to invite anyone over and reveal what happened behind our perfect facade. When I was 16, a particularly observant English teacher noticed the finger-shaped bruises on my neck after Richard had choked me for coming home 15 minutes late. She called me to her desk after class, concern etched across her face. "Sarah, is everything okay at home?" she asked. I hesitated, years of conditioning warring with the desperate need to tell someone. "I'm fine," I mumbled, eyes fixed on the floor. "I just fell." Against someone's hands, she touched her neck to show the bruise pattern. Tears welled in my eyes, and for a moment, I considered telling her everything. But then I remembered Richard's constant threats. "If you ever tell anyone about our private family business," he'd warned, "they'll take you away from your mother. Is that what you want, to never see her again?" So I lied to my teacher, insisted I was fine, and hurried away before she could ask more questions. That evening, Richard came into my room, smiling. "Your school called today," he said, sitting on the edge of my bed. "Something about a concerned teacher." My blood turned to ice. I didn't say anything. "Good girl." He patted my cheek, the gentle gesture more terrifying than a slap. "Because you know what happens to little girls who tell tales, don't you?" I nodded, unable to speak through my fear. After that, I tried reporting him twice. Once through an anonymous school counseling line, and once by walking into a police station with bruised ribs when I was 17. Both times, nothing came of it. Both times, Richard's anger afterward suggested he somehow knew. By the time I turned 19, I was saving every dollar from my part-time job at a local coffee shop, planning my escape. One more year, I told myself. One more year of keeping my head down, then I'd have enough to disappear to another state where Richard couldn't find me. But I never got that year. My 19th birthday fell on a Tuesday. My mother gave me a silver charm bracelet at breakfast, her eyes darting toward Richard as I opened the small velvet box. "It's beautiful," I whispered, touched by the gift. Richard didn't acknowledge my birthday at all, which was fine by me. The less attention from him, the better. That evening, Mom brought home a small cake from my favorite bakery. We sang a quiet, happy birthday in the kitchen, and for a moment, it felt almost normal. Richard drank more scotch than usual during dinner, his mood growing darker with each glass. "I'm going to bed," I announced after helping to clean up. "I have an early class tomorrow." My mother hugged me, whispering, "Happy birthday, Sarah Bear," into my hair. I fell asleep reading a psychology textbook, dreaming of the day I would become a therapist, someone who helps people escape situations like mine. The sound of my bedroom door crashing open jolted me awake at midnight. Richard stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the hallway light, reeking of alcohol. "You think you're special because it's your birthday," he slurred, advancing toward my bed. I scrambled backward against the headboard, textbook clutched to my chest like a shield. "Please," I was sleeping. 19 years of feeding you, housing you, putting up with your ungrateful attitude," he continued as if I hadn't spoken. "And what do I get in return? Disrespect, talking back, making your mother choose between us." "I don't." His first blow caught me across the face, sending me sprawling onto the floor. The second kick connected with my ribs, forcing the air from my lungs in a pained whoosh. I curled into a protective ball, arms covering my head, as he continued the assault. "Please stop," I gasped between blows. "Mom, help me." Through tear-blurred eyes, I saw her appear in the doorway. My mother, my protector, the woman who once promised it was you and me against the world. She stood frozen, face blank and expressionless, watching as Richard grabbed my arm and twisted it backward until something popped in my shoulder. The pain was immediate and blinding. I screamed, a raw animal sound that didn't seem like it could come from my body. "Mom, please," I sobbed, reaching toward her with my good arm. She took a single step backward, then turned and walked away. The sound of their bedroom door closing echoed like a gunshot. Richard delivered a final kick to my stomach. "Clean yourself up," he muttered, "and keep the noise down." I lay on the floor for hours, drifting in and out of consciousness, my dislocated shoulder sending waves of agony through my body with every slight movement. When the first light of dawn filtered through my curtains, I dragged myself to the bathroom, desperate for something to dull the pain. The medicine cabinet offered little help, some expired Tylenol and cough syrup. I reached under the sink, hoping to find the stronger painkillers my mother sometimes brought home from the hospital. Instead, my fingers brushed against fabric, wadded up, and shoved behind the towels. I pulled it out, wincing at the movement. It was a dress shirt, Richard's expensive white Brooks Brothers, now stained with rusty brown splotches. Blood, my blood. As I stared at the shirt, the truth hit me like another physical blow. My mother hadn't failed to help me, she had helped him hide the evidence. She was cleaning up after him, protecting him, choosing him over me again and again and again. Something broke inside me then, something more painful than my shoulder. It was the last remnant of trust I had in my mother, the last thread of hope that she might someday choose me. I decided in that bathroom, cradling my useless arm against my chest, I would leave, today, now, with or without money, with or without a plan. I struggled to pack a small bag one-handed, taking only essentials and the charm bracelet, not because I wanted it, but because it might be worth something. The house was quiet as I crept downstairs at 7 a.m. Richard and my mother were still asleep. A neighbor found me sitting on the curb at the end of our street, pale and shaking from pain and shock. Mrs. Patterson, a retired nurse who had always smiled kindly at me, never asked questions about the shouting from our house. "Oh, honey," she said, helping me into her car. "Let's get you to the emergency room." At the hospital, I told the doctors I had fallen down the stairs. They didn't believe me. The pattern of injuries told a different story, but they respected my silence. My shoulder was reset, my ribs wrapped, and my cuts cleaned and bandaged. A social worker came to speak with me and left her card when I refused to file a report. Mrs. Patterson took me in, setting me up in her guest room while I healed and figured out my next steps. Richard never came looking for me. My mother called once, her voice small and frightened on Mrs. Patterson's answering machine. "Sarah, please come home, he's sorry. We can work this out." I deleted the message without calling back. With Mrs. Patterson's help, I found a tiny studio apartment near Georgia State University, where I'd been taking classes. I worked 2 jobs, mornings at the coffee shop, evenings waiting tables, while continuing my education part-time. The years passed in a blur of exhaustion, determination, and healing. I cut all contact with my mother and Richard, changed my phone number, and created new social media accounts under a variation of my name. By 26, I had graduated with my psychology degree and landed an entry-level position at a community mental health center. I specialized in trauma and abuse cases, using my experience to help others in situations like what I had escaped. My apartment was small but safe, decorated with plants and second-hand furniture that was mine. I had friends, therapy, and even a sweet rescue dog named Cooper who alerted me when someone approached my door. I was building a life, a real one free from fear. Then the letter arrived. Plain white envelope, my name and address handwritten in my mother's familiar looping script. No return address. I let it sit unopened on my kitchen counter for 3 days, anxiety rising every time I walked past it. When I finally tore it open, the contents were brief. "Sarah, I have cancer. Stage 4, we need to talk before it's too late. I've lost the important documents you'll need after I'm gone. Please call me. Mom." No apology, no acknowledgement of what happened, the expectation that I would come running now that she needed me. I crumpled the letter and threw it away, then retrieved it an hour later, smoothing the wrinkles with trembling hands. Despite everything, she was still my mother. And important documents could mean anything: birth certificates, social security cards, and insurance policies I might need. After a long session with my therapist discussing boundaries and self-protection, I called the number in the letter. "Sarah," my mother's voice sounded older, weaker than I remembered. "You called." "I got your letter," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "What documents are missing?" She coughed, a wet, rattling sound. "Your birth certificate, some financial papers, insurance policies, I can't find them anywhere." "And you need me to look for them." "Please, the doctors say I don't have long, and Richard," she paused. "Richard isn't handling this well, he's rarely home. Someone needs to sort through things." Against my better judgment, against the frantic warnings from the part of me still terrified of that house, I agreed to come over the following Saturday when Richard would be at his weekly golf game. The house looked the same: imposing Tudor facade, manicured lawn, gleaming windows. My hands shook as I rang the doorbell, half expecting Richard to answer despite my mother's assurance he'd be gone. But it was she who opened the door, thinner, grayer, moving with the careful steps of someone in constant pain. Her eyes filled with tears at the sight of me. "Sarah," she whispered, "you came." I didn't hug her. "Where are the papers you want me to find?" She flinched at my coldness but nodded. "In my closet, I keep a filing box." I followed her up the stairs, noticing how she gripped the railing, how her breathing labored with each step. Cancer looked exactly as terrible as I'd imagined. Despite everything, a flicker of sympathy stirred in my chest. Her bedroom was different. Hospital bed in place of the king-sized mattress she'd shared with Richard, medication bottles lining the nightstand, oxygen tank standing ready in the corner. "The closet," she gestured weakly. "In the back. I haven't been able to reach the higher shelves for months." I opened the closet door, hit immediately by the familiar scent of her perfume, Chanel No. 5, the one luxury she'd allowed herself even before Richard. The walk-in space was organized with Richard's military precision, clothes arranged by color and season, and shoes in labeled boxes. In the back corner, hidden behind winter coats, sat a large storage container. "Is this it?" I called over my shoulder. "No, those are holiday decorations. There should be a metal file box." I pushed deeper into the closet, moving aside hanging garment bags. In the farthest corner, almost invisible in the shadows, was a small gray metal lockbox. I pulled it out, surprised by its weight. "Is this it? It's locked." My mother had eased herself onto the edge of the hospital bed, her face pale with exertion. "That's not what I was thinking of, but—" Her expression changed, a flash of something, fear, crossing her features. "Those are old financial records. The birth certificate would be in a folder." But something in her reaction made me clutch the box tighter. "Do you have the key?" "I don't think so. It's probably lost. Leave it, Sarah." The sudden urgency in her voice raised alarm bells. I examined the box more, a standard filing lockbox, the kind with a simple tumbler lock. The kind I could probably open with the hairpin currently holding back my bangs. "What's in here, Mom?" "Nothing important. Please put it back." But 7 years of independence had strengthened my resolve. I carried the box past her, ignoring her protests, and took it downstairs to the kitchen table. With steady hands, I worked the hairpin into the lock, remembering a YouTube tutorial I'd watched after locking myself out of my apartment last year. The lock clicked open after several minutes of manipulation. My mother had followed me downstairs, hovering anxiously nearby. "Sarah, that's private property. You can't." I lifted the lid, and the words died in her throat. Inside were dozens of papers, neatly organized with paper clips and sticky notes. I pulled out the first folder, labeled with my name and a date from 7 years ago. Inside was a police report, the report I'd filed at 17 after Richard had broken my wrist, except it wasn't filed. Across the top in red ink, "Withdrawn by guardian." My hands shaking, I pulled out another folder. Hospital records from when I was 14, documenting suspicious bruising and a concussion. Notes indicated the attending physician had recommended a child welfare check. A letter stapled to it confirmed the case was closed after parental explanation and home visit. Folder after folder revealed the same pattern: every attempt I'd made to get help, every teacher's concern, every anonymous report, all intercepted, withdrawn, or explained away. By her, by my mother. The final document made me physically ill. A formal letter from my high school English teacher, the one who had noticed the bruises on my neck, was addressed to Child Protective Services. Attached was a response thanking the teacher for her concern, but stating that the parent has provided a satisfactory explanation and that the case was closed. Paperclipped to these was a handwritten note in my mother's handwriting. "Richard, all taken care of. The teacher won't be a problem anymore." I looked up at my mother, who had sunk into a chair across from me, her face ashen. "You knew," I whispered. "You knew everything he did to me, and you helped him cover it up." "Sarah, you don't understand." "I understand." My voice was steady despite the earthquake happening inside me. "You chose him. Every single time, you chose him over me." She reached across the table, her cancer-thin hand trembling. I was scared. He threatened to leave us with nothing if I ever went against him. We had nowhere to go, no money of our own. I was a child. The scream tore from my throat, years of suppressed rage finally finding release. "Your child, you were supposed to protect me." Tears streamed down her face. I thought I could handle him, manage his temper. I thought if I just kept the peace. "Peace?" I laughed, holding up the folders. "This isn't peace. This is a conspiracy. You worked to silence me, to discredit me, and to keep me trapped with my abuser." "It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like, Mom? Explain to me why." My mother stood in the doorway and watched while her husband dislocated her daughter's shoulder. "Explain why you hid his bloody shirt instead of calling the police. Explain these." I slammed my hand on the stack of intercepted reports. She had no answer, more tears, and more excuses about fear and financial dependency. I gathered the folders, closing them carefully as if they might disintegrate in my hands. These weren't papers, they were evidence. Proof of years of abuse and cover-ups. Proof that might still matter, even now. "Is your cancer even real?" I asked. Her eyes widened. "Of course it is, how could you think?" "Because you've lied about everything else. Because you lied every time you said you loved me, every time you promised to keep me safe." I stood, clutching the lockbox to my chest. "I'm taking these." "Sarah, please, Richard will be home soon. If he finds out you have those." The mention of his name still sent a chill through me, but I straightened my spine. "What will he do? Beat me? Been there. Threaten me? Done that. I'm not afraid anymore, Mom. Not of him and not of you." I walked out of that house for the second and final time, the weight of evidence in my arms somehow lightening the burden I'd carried for years. In my car, I allowed myself exactly 5 minutes of breakdown, heaving sobs that left me gasping, before wiping my face and driving straight to a law office I'd researched years ago but never dared to visit. The receptionist at Harmon and Associates looked concerned about my red eyes and the metal box I hugged like a lifeline. But she offered me water and asked me to wait while she checked if anyone could see me without an appointment. 20 minutes later, I was sitting across from Monique Harmon herself, a formidable black woman in her 50s whose office walls were lined with degrees and awards for her work with domestic violence survivors. "How can I help you today?" she asked, her voice kind but professional. I opened the box and placed the first folder on her desk. "I want to know if it's too late to press charges against my stepfather for years of child abuse, and against my mother for covering it up." Monique's expression remained neutral as she examined the documents, but her eyes grew troubled as she worked through the stack. "The statute of limitations for assault cases is usually quite limited," she explained, "but there are exceptions for cases involving minors, especially when there is evidence of systematic cover-up and interference with reporting." She looked up at me, compassion and determination mingling in her gaze. "It won't be easy. Your stepfather likely has resources and connections. Your mother's involvement complicates things, but these documents," she tapped the folders, "these show a pattern that no judge could ignore." For the first time in years, I felt something like hope, not for reconciliation, not for healing the unhealable wounds of betrayal, but for justice, for accountability. "How do we start?" I asked. The next 6 months were the hardest of my life, which is saying something considering what I had already lived through. Working with Monique and her team meant revisiting every incident, documenting every scar, physical and emotional. It meant giving depositions, speaking to prosecutors, and having my character attacked by Richard's high-priced defense attorneys. My mother, faced with her charges of child endangerment and obstruction, eventually turned state's witness against Richard in exchange for a plea deal. She testified about years of abuse at his hands, abuse I had never seen or known about, and about how he had isolated us, controlled our finances, and threatened worse violence if she ever tried to leave or protect me. Her testimony didn't repair what was broken between us. Understanding the complexity of her fear didn't erase the betrayal, but it helped me see her not as a monster, but as another victim who had made terrible choices from a place of terror and dependency. The day Richard was sentenced, 8 years for aggravated child abuse, with more time for witness tampering, I sat in the courtroom alone by choice. Neither a daughter celebrating justice nor a stepdaughter savoring revenge. A woman watching the system finally work the way it should have decades earlier. My mother received 3 years of probation and mandatory counseling. I haven't spoken to her since the trial, though she sends letters to my therapist's office monthly. Maybe someday I'll read them. The settlement from the civil suit against Richard provided enough money to pay off my student loans and buy a small house in a different part of Atlanta. A home with strong locks, a security system, and sun-filled rooms where shadows have nowhere to hide. I still work at the Community Mental Health Center, now as a licensed counselor specializing in family trauma. 3 days a week, I run a support group for young adults who have survived family violence. On the wall of our meeting room hangs a simple framed quote, "Your scars are proof that you survived." Some nights, I still wake up panicking, thinking I hear my bedroom door crashing open. Some days, I still flinch at sudden movements or raised voices. Healing isn't linear, as I tell my clients. It's messy and ongoing, and sometimes feels like taking 2 steps backward for every step forward. But I am walking forward. I'm 28 now. My shoulder aches when it rains, a permanent reminder of that night. But it's strong enough to carry the weight of my new life, to hug my friends, to throw tennis balls for Cooper at the dog park, and to hold the hands of scared teenagers who come to my office with the same haunted eyes I once had. Sometimes people ask if my revenge brought closure. I tell them it wasn't revenge I wanted, it was justice. It was the truth. It was making sure that what happened to me couldn't happen to anyone else at Richard's hands. It was proving to myself that the system could work despite the delays and imperfections. The locked box sits in my closet now, evidence I no longer need but can't bring myself to destroy. Sometimes it's about burning it all, a ritual cleansing of the past. But then I remember how many children don't have proof, don't have documentation, and don't have anyone who believes them. So I keep it, this archive of betrayal and survival. Not to torture myself with memories, but to remind myself of how far I've come. From a terrified girl crying on her bedroom floor to a woman who has reclaimed her power, her voice, and her future. The greatest revenge against those who try to break you isn't making them suffer. It's living well despite their best efforts. It's building a life so full and meaningful that their cruelty becomes one chapter in a much longer, more beautiful story. Have you ever had to confront a family betrayal? How did you find the strength to move forward? Share your experience in the comments below and remember that your story matters. Like and subscribe if this resonated with you, and know that whatever you've survived, you're not alone.